Hi guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Security Space podcast. Today I am joined by Darren Kingsnorth, and what we will be discussing is all about rethinking cyber threat intelligence and bringing it back to the first principles. What do we mean by that? Well, it's 2026. The vendor market is absolutely swimming with products. It is very saturated. It's good and bad that we have so much choice. Darren, I'm sure that you love the amount of people knocking on your door saying they've got the next gen zero trust AI agentic super unicorn tool. But with that, there is obviously a little bit of jest with that. So what we are discussing today is stripping CTI back and coming back to the first principles. What does it mean? And can we take some lesson from that as we come into this little bit of a clouded era in it? Um, but before we get into it, Darren, are you okay just to let the audience know a little bit about yourself, if that's okay?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Darren Kingsnorth. I'm a head of threat intelligence at a financial services insurance company. Really, my journey started um, just 15 or so years ago, really after university. Very much a cookie cutter way of working straight from university into a graduate position. But even before then, I made my first computer, built it, actually with my mum, actually, just because it's kind of a nice little bonding moment there. But same time though, yeah, built a computer when I was like 10 or 11, if I remember rightly.
Wow. Okay.
Um, Again, back in the days when you had a full big screen, CRT screen and similar, and a big workstation, and all that kind of good stuff. So that was lots of fun. Um, but I think even going back from there, I think back and I was thinking about obviously, the intros and similar and things like that in terms of I realized that I was a nerd way before I realized I was a nerd. In that I used to go through like CFAX, teletext, and things like that. Obviously, teletext is no more, unfortunately. But yeah, just trying different channels to try and find hidden things and stuff like that. And I did actually find some interesting stuff back in the day. But yeah, again, that time of my life, right? Just scrolling through numbers on a TV remote,
Yeah.
living the dream, of course. But yeah, it kind of that kind of mentality came through me via computer games and similar, right? I mean, not to say that okay, I just went from one one phase to the next, but I kind of did in some sense. So I started out at college doing computer games development, then realized I never knew about the inside world of computer game development in terms of the angle of crunch. So essentially, working like 90 plus hours to release a time and similar. So I was like, nah, don't want to do any of that.
Yeah.
And so I went into computer forensics. So obviously everyone in the like the noughties kind of time, CSI was a big thing. I was like, oh, that seems quite interesting. I used to do, lots of different things from a technical perspective. Maybe it'd be like touching up photographs from Photoshop and similar things like that to help people out, and lots of weird and wonderful stuff. So yeah, I thought let's give that a crack. And then about a year into my university course there, the government cyber forensics kind of service, I say computer forensics kind of service just fell off a cliff.
Yeah.
And so one of my friends at the time, I said, check out computer security. So I kind of changed courses into that. And then went to a placement. And so that placement was Semantic or Message Labs it used to be. That was a really eye-opening experience in terms of ultimately still a major player now, right? Even, 10, 15, 20 years later, in terms of, how the world works with regards to email. And a stat that hangs with me forever. Again, most stats are made up on the spot, so don't get me wrong. But I think it was something like there's a 3% success rate of spam, which is absolutely unreal when you think of the billions and billions and billions of emails that are out there. Um, Probably entirely making it up in terms of, my memory is dreadful, but at the same time, though, yeah, moved out of there into, well, I tried some kind of pen testing as it was back in the day. Dreadful job title, nevertheless. But yeah, that was really interesting. Went to university. I was like, I don't want to do pen testing. I want to do something else. So I went into a grad program, and they're like, you've done pen testing, straight into the pen testing team. So that was really fun. And I was like, but actually, to be fair, it had some fantastic people there, and I was reading only a couple of months back around an article from a pen tester in terms of it really does help you find out how the world works because you do really get exposed to so many different work environments in that nobody can have 1,000 jobs in their lifetime, but by being a pen tester you truly can because you go into hundreds of different places, see how they work, see how they operate, see the good things and the bad things, and at the same time, it really gives you a view of how secure or insecure
Mm.
respective sectors and overall, the planet is really, depending on what kind of interesting stuff you get exposed to. So it's quite frightening,
Yeah.
um, but it's really grounding as well. And you realize that actually, yeah, we are in the losing fight. Moving on from there, I love pen testing, don't get me wrong, did web app pen testing similar. Um, just because, hey, I get to stay at home right with kids and things like that. So, and I do know and I respect to those network internal pen testers who are on site all the time.
Mm.
And it is a calling, fair play to them. But yeah, so I realized over the time that it's like, yeah, I really don't want to do pen testing. I really don't want to do pen testing. So, and I realized my real kind of calling was open source intelligence, really. So obviously, as a pen tester, you get exposed to weird and wonderful things, and the sales guys they love it, right? They're like, "Oh yeah, he can do that. Of course he can." What we do, I don't know. So it's and that's pretty much an expose of pen testing in the industry itself. But nevertheless, you do have to think of your feet, and I think that's a great trait to have. But at the same time, I really found my calling with some of the interesting stuff I did related to open source intelligence and similar. So that kind of put me in the realms of threat intelligence as well. And yeah, here I am today, really, in threat intelligence for 7 years now.
Mm.
Uh, so yeah, it's been an interesting journey,
Yeah.
cookie cutter to some degree,
Yeah.
but at the same time, it's not just a bad thing. Don't get me wrong, I don't think I would choose my journey uh, if I were to go back,
Yeah.
because of many different reasons, whether it be because of loans as they are now and similar things like that.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, so it's an interesting kind of divergence there. And that said, though, again, as I say, in terms of that pen testing kind of experience, it hangs with you forever.
Yeah.
There is no greater buzz. I can totally see why the criminals do what they do, because there is no greater buzz than when you've got someone to click on your link when
Mm.
you've called them up, pretending, in this one job, I was pretending to be a scouser. I can't do accents to save my life. So I was pretending I was ill. And yeah, so I rang them up and said, "Oh yeah, can you from IT?" Because I found on LinkedIn that this guy was on holiday,
Yeah.
and I thought, there's a few different offices around there. Give him a call, and yeah, obviously tricked this person into clicking the link, and I was in. And I was like, literally
Yeah.
record high. Don't get me wrong, and you can totally see why they do it. Uh, and obviously, don't get me wrong, the millions of dollars of cryptocurrency obviously goes a long way too, right? But yeah, so that's kind of me in a nutshell.
Fantastic, Darren. No, I really appreciate that insight. And yeah, we'll definitely circle round to sort of what you said there at the end, like, oh, if you was to do it again, would you do anything different? I would like to sort of pick your brains on that towards the end. But yeah, obviously just kind of move it into sort of what we were speaking about today then in terms of sort of stripping CTI back to its fundamentals. I suppose the best place to start then is Darren, in sort of layman's terms, sort of define what CTI is, and then we can sort of move forward as to how it's sort of got a little bit blurred over the years. So when you were moving into the OSINT slash CTI world, A, what attracted you? And B, what did the world look like, sort of like when you were moving into that space?
Hmm. Yeah, it's an interesting one, and I think, like with so many parts of cyber and the cyber teams, you know that incident response are going to react to incidents, right? You know that SOC are going to do alerts and similar. But with forensic, Christ, with threat intelligence, it can be anything. And I think that's its own worst enemy. And that it can be everything and it can be nothing.
Yeah.
And so, for example, why do we lock our doors at night? It's because of threat intelligence, because bad guys trying to get in. But wwhy don't we lock our, cellar door or cellar or attic loft,
Yeah.
whatever you call it nowadays?
Yeah.
Um, of course, because no one's going to rappel in from the roof and get through there. But yeah, and that's the fundamental concept of it, really. And it's so easy. And I see so many teams, no doubt myself, in the past, in terms of drinking that Kool-Aid of, oh yeah, you need this, you need this, you need blinky, blinky, blinky. When actually, it's ultimately threat intelligence is informing decision making from an uncertain question, whatever that may be. Am I secure from this, or what have you? Or is this bad guy going to hurt me? Or really, what should I do first?
Mm.
And so it can be a massive tool and a force multiplier, really, across the whole business. especially being in ultimately, the tech world, the cyber-enabled world. Most crime nowadays, to some degree, is cyber-enabled crime. Therefore, that gives us a bit of a steer into, what the bad guys are doing and similar.
Yeah.
And because of that, that means generally the domain expertise kind of lies with us.
Mm.
And so I think going back, um, say, 10, 15 years ago with pen test and similar, threat intel is as old as time itself. Go back to, Caesar times and similar, right? So it's not really changed in what it is. It's just the environment's changed. And so I think where we've come and where we've gone to has really been led by money. And
Mm.
I think, going back to InfoSec and InfoSec, where I used to go back, 10, 15 years ago, they're very different, but the same. But what we're seeing heavily now is, the VC money coming in. Everybody wants a Lamborghini, right? So you see all these kind of new startups, new startups, new startups, rather than actually solving the problem itself. And I think it's a showcase of that because what they really should put on, any big conference door is every single year, year on year, there's been more reported ransomware breaches. And so, I mean, that's ransomware.live is a great site, and obviously ransom looking similar, right? But at the same time, there are others to purchase. Um, but yeah, great site. And as of last year, there's 8,500 reported ransomware breaches.
Yeah.
That is 2,500 more than the year before. So clearly, we're losing heavily,
Yeah.
uh, and yet you see record profits from cybersecurity companies. So there's clearly a disconnect. And
Mm.
I think what I've seen more and more with regards to products as well. And I love, you don't know, I think that's why, Threat Intel is to some degree my calling, just because I love helping people and I love, giving someone a different tinge to something, whether it is, don't get me wrong, I've fixed many printers in my time. And I think there's a fantastic tweet from somebody who's like, oh yeah, I spent 10 years pen testing. But then somebody asks you, oh, can you fix my printer? And ultimately, yeah, that's my life. Uh, but at the same time, um, I think we do see this movement towards, especially with AI now, it is the AI Kool-Aid and the AI hype train. And don't get me wrong, I've used AI since it came out. I've got like four different agents, and I daren't tell the missus how much money we're spending on Claude, ChatGPT, and Grok and similar. But they are fantastic tools, and they
Yeah.
have radically changed the market. And really, to be fair, I think they've reduced people like me in terms of commoditized me. And so generally, and I don't like the word techie. It's ultimately domain expertise in that because everyone's a domain expertise expert, right? It's just in their respective field. Um, but I think that's massively commoditized us because now rather than somebody going to me and say, "Oh yeah, what about this?" "Well, I'm not going to go to you. Instead, I'm just going to speak to my AI agent.
Mm.
Which don't get me wrong, probably 8% of the way there, right? Especially how good it is now. And
Mm.
I think that's massively going to affect the market, and very much so in terms of people as well. Because of course, once you start replacing people in terms of I don't need to speak to you, I can speak to this automated process that I can do while you're asleep.
Mm.
Then you start to bring up that drawbridge of knowledge, and so then you end up with people who are just using AI and nothing more. And then you users of the tool. I mean, I see it myself when I used to, not to say I'm a developer by any means, but I used to, pull out the Python from, many different times, just coding a little tool up, things like that. Don't get me wrong, it used to take me a while because it's so in between that you just forget how syntax works and similar. But yeah, now I can't remember the last time I actually touched Python. It must have been, a year and a half, 2 years ago, maybe,
Right. Yeah.
since AI come about. So obviously, if somebody asked me if AI died tomorrow and somebody asked me to code something, I'd be absolutely useless.
Yeah.
Big again that thinking of that, and I think I've become a far better prompt engineer than I ever have a coder. And I think coders, I was speaking to a good few devs not so long ago, and that they say the same. And so I think we're hanging a lot of success, capability, and otherwise onto a tool that really isn't even in the UK.
Mm.
And so, not to delve too far into geopolitics, um, but it's scary times, and you start to see how these things all apply together.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you look at like data sovereignty and provenance and things like that. And I appreciate we're totally nowhere near where you asked the question previously.
No,
Uh,
no, 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 no. That's great,
and
and I wanted to echo a point that you made actually about the reason that the market has become a little bit blurred is because of the money being invested in it. And you made the point that it's coming down from the VCs, and I did a lot of work with the sort of the VCs, the ecosystem, the startups over the last couple of years, and you're absolutely right. And part of it is there's a lot of non-cyber VCs that got involved over the last sort of 24 months investing in cyber startups because they've seen the exit values, they've seen how much sort of like return that they can actually get from getting in at the seed stage. You see the sort of money that the whizzes are producing, that the cyber artists are producing from last year, and they're like, oh, okay, well, money talks, cyber's hot, we're going to invest in that. But to further echo your point, you're absolutely right in the sense of AI is now here. Cyber's kind of like a little bit like, oh, you're not as sexy as before. AI is now, and therefore we think that this year and possibly next, all the non-cyber VCs are gonna move back out and move towards the sort of the AI vertical now. Now that only focuses. We're only in the sphere of our conversation where we're at right now. We're only talking about the money being invested in the VCs. Whether that's right, whether that's wrong, is a different story altogether. But that we're just talking about where the money is being funneled. Um, that being said, it's not to say that the money being invested in it is not going to remain astronomically high. I still think it is. I think because of the explosion of AI. Security now is absolutely sort of like it's all in the testing phase now. It's like, okay, we've got AI, how can we keep it secure whilst we embed it into our systems? I think it'll only help it. It's not like AI stealing the money away from security. I think it will work in parallel, to be honest with you. Um, what was the other point that you made that was really interesting? It was of the sense of like, oh, basically how the tools are making sort of like part of our skill set redundant, and you're absolutely right. And to bring him up, because you can't not bring him up sometimes, but Elon Musk has said sort of like, yeah, even by sort of like 2030, you might not need to worry about pensions because by the time that you get to retirement age, like the accessing commodities is going to be much easier because the way that we're going to be moving to a life that's a little bit more easy to live because of how we're sort of embracing sort of artificial intelligence and I can sort of see where he's going with it. I'd need to do some more research as to how that would work in terms of financially how we'd move there as a society, but it's an interesting point. We've gone well off topic there, Darren, but no,
yeah.
I really sort of really enjoy it. Where I wanted to bring you back to it is your view on sort of bringing CTI back to its fundamentals and to not get sort of and to not to be able to see the wood through the trees. Do you think that you're in that luxurious position that you can see that because of your foundation in pen testing and because you can sort of you've had that growing up in terms of like I've been on the other side ethically, therefore I know exactly what to look for. Whereas maybe someone who comes in from the geopol side of threat intelligence might not understand the technical nuances and therefore lean on a tech stack to assist. Do you think you're in that luxurious position, or do you think I'm way off with that assumption?
Um, to some degree, yeah. I think, I mean, it all comes down to bias at the end of the day. And I know a lot of people, especially in TI, don't like bias, but I think it's a superpower in that I know things that you don't know, but then if you were on the team, then you know things that I don't know. So I think that appreciation of that is a fantastic resource to tap into rather than if we had, five ex-pen testers, for example, in a team, they're all going to think pretty much similar, right? And yes, don't get me wrong, lived experience is similar. Um, but yeah, I think there's a massive, massive value in terms of diversifying mindset and diversifying lived experience is massively useful. I mean, I think that kind of ties into your point there in terms of, there's a lot of ex-mil in Intel, and rightly so. But I have no idea what it's like to be fired at. The only thing in comparison to that is like Medal of Honor or Call of Duty, where it's like, oh yeah, I finished it in hard mode, which means absolutely nothing in real life. But at the same time, I have no idea what it's like to arrest someone. So, there's a lot of ex-police in Intel as well. So, it's those kind of skills and those kind of lived experiences definitely help, especially when if there's an instant kicking off, for example, if someone's used to seeing, gunfire coming over, not to say trenches, they're that old, but yeah, and similar that yeah, that to be hit by something like a ransomware attack is ultimately nothing, right?
Yep.
So it's great to have a mixture of those kind of skill sets and similar. And yeah, I think it's of massive benefit. Same time as well, I think into not to delve too far into AI again, but I think those kind of skills are somewhat either fleeting or they can be again a force multiplier if used correctly.
Yep.
What we're seeing nowadays, especially with hiring similar, and what everybody talks to me about in some fashion is people literally typing their answers whilst you're speaking to them on an interview, and you can see their fingers going more similar, and they kind of hesitate and then say, "Oh, well, I think this." Um, so yeah, there is a balance to be had there in terms of great if you're adopting and adapting to technology, fantastic. AI enabled workers are the future 100%.
Yep.
Uh, just because, yeah, just the other day I vibed up a thing to tear apart an audio file. And could I have done that within about 10 minutes? Not a chance.
No, no.
Um, but I think it's that admission of that. And I think, yeah, I think where we're going is somewhat a shade, well, a shade darker in terms of the integrity of things. To say, well, ultimately, yeah, I vibed this up. First person to say I vibed up something, right? That's fine. It's a tool.
Yep.
Um, but I think where people start to go wrong is where people don't admit to that and they said, "Oh, I built this by hand,
Yep.
blood, sweat, and tears." Like, well, you didn't, did you? Just a single prompt, and there we go.
Yep.
And especially when people have it in purple. Anyone who sees purple in a platform, that is generally 99% AI. So that is a great marker. But again, you've got to do it. You've got to use the tools to know that, right?
Yep.
And so, yeah, so many times nowadays where I've seen things I can straight away see it. I don't need an AI checker to see that just because of how it looks and how it thinks. But a lot of people don't see that because they're not used to seeing that. And I think that's coming back to the original problem is it's easy if you know.
Yep.
And with fraud and similar, or like phishing attacks and phishing emails, when I do I try and do a lot of outreach and kind of help others. And don't get me wrong, AI is to totally steal Steve King's great quote that he said the other day was a rising tide raises all ships. And I'm terrible at these kind of phrases, as you ask anyone who works with me.
Yeah.
I make an absolute pig's ear of it. But nevertheless, it really does. And so that also helps the attackers as well. So you are lifting that floor for them as well. Difference, of course, is they have no boundaries. If I wanted to, start rinsing Bitcoin and similar, as a business, for example, then great, you have to have approval, you have to go through regulation, similar and things like that, right? And some level of process documentation. Attack, you don't need any of those things. And you can also do all the illegal stuff too. So they will always have that advantage. And
Yep.
I think where we fight and where a lot of people forget in terms of the foundations of TI is really around that information advantage. Who knows do you know something I don't? And I
Yep.
think that's where a lot of the vendors are missing out. Tell me something I don't know. And I think when I see an email to say, "Oh, hey, Darren, we're looking to new AI plus 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 AI," and you're like, "Okay, great. Tell me something I don't know." And they're like, "Oh yeah, no, that thinks that. No, that's no use to me." But I think people really need to put, their their two pence on the table to say, "Okay, this is what we know about you."
Yep.
If that is nothing that you don't already know, then cool, great. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time. But improve this and you can do something better.
Yep.
But I think that's the biggest issue bar none really in terms of that's so what and
Yes.
tell me something I don't know. Because
It's,
there's
it's it's moving it between from information to intelligence, isn't it? It's moving
absolutely
from like, yeah, we know all these threats to business. We know that our creds have been leaked there. We know sort of like, oh, a name's been mentioned on the dark web here or whatever it might be. We're aware of this, but then there's all about that prioritization matrix, which again, you got to look at the principles of of your sort of CTI workflows, and you're like, okay, what is business critical and what is, yeah, it's a threat. And if we get round to it, it's not business critical. We're not, the doors aren't going to shut tomorrow if whatever happens here. So I suppose it's that to bring it back and highlight your point. It's that diversification of your teams where like you're constantly challenging each other. You constantly if it's in your Monday stand-ups being like, okay, like, oh, I think this is a threat. Oh, well, I don't think that's a threat because of X, Y, and Z. And you need to have that balance of whether that's gender, culture, age. You made a really good point about bringing technology into teams, bringing these agentic sort of like workflows where you're like, okay, we'll get them sort of involved because they sort of are very objective to a degree. It depends how you sort of train them. So it's that diversification as to be like, okay, what are our principles? And, moving forward, how can we use our principles to sort of differentiate between information intelligence so that we can be the best possible team, to be honest with you. So is that sort of like what the angle that you were going down, Darren? Yeah.
Not at all. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, very, very much so. Um, and at the same time, just come back to that information advantage piece. It's a great analogy because ultimately you are just playing chess against another person at the end of the
Mm.
day, and I think we sometimes forget that. In that ultimately we can't arrest them, unless you're in a protected capacity. Then yeah, you fill your boots. But generally, a case of they can't either because they're in Russia, they're somewhere else that's protected by, legislation, uh, situation similar. Um, but with the information advantage, I think it's really all about knowing what others don't first. And so I think that's where threat intelligence is massively vital because they can go do the digging. They can dig all day long to say, okay, well, actually, we found this here. Did you know about this? Oh my goodness, didn't even know about that. That's amazing. Let's resolve that. Let's do something about it. For example, like, we had the back in 2022, I want to say, move it. That was massive for around the world. There's like thousands and thousands of organizations got hit by that. However, if you knew about that and you knew about the vulnerability in similar, then ultimately you could respond to that. Very much like with NPM, not so long ago, in months in 2025, where ultimately what are developers meant to do if they can't ultimately install packages that they're aware of? So yeah, you see everything's the same, just slightly changed in terms of rather than typo squatting, you have typo squatted packages now, and it's shooting fish in a barrel for the attackers, um, because all these kind of things works right. Yes, you start blocking domains and similar, great, but ultimately you've got to block the packages. Then that means you need more tooling to ultimately complement that. Um, so it is really tough, and I think you can see why. I think it was Microsoft said last year that cybercrime is worth like $3 trillion
Mm.
with a T, and that's just absolutely ludicrous. So we are fighting a losing battle with ultimately a more funded, more well-educated enemy to some degree, because ultimately, these people are paying for ultimately insiders. So I think, like we saw with the North Korean threat and similar, right? There's something that okay, kind of happened on the ground and similar, but now, well, they're providing in some cases better services than the legitimate companies are, which I think is borderline ludicrous. But at the same time, it shows you that that they are providing that unregulated, unrequested pen test, um, and how they kind of phrase that. But really shows the lengths they're going to ensure that okay, they're the good guys, but ultimately, you know, a terrorist is another person's freedom fighter, right? So I think they are playing the psyops game very well, really. And not to say we're going to start embracing Klopp and embracing or similar, but same time though, yeah, the impact they've had on the business and on the on businesses, on industries, has been absolutely monumental. And
Yeah.
don't get me wrong, the good guys are taking these things down, but it's we're in a wild west, and we have been really for 30 years. Coming back to when I was in Message Labs, 15 years ago, um, a great chap I met there who said, "Oh yeah, people have been saying cybers have been a bubble for years." And somebody told me that 15 years ago, and I took that message with me. It's like ultimately, we're 15 years later, it's still a bubble,
It's a
and
big
that's
ball, yeah.
30 years worth of growth.
Yeah.
Uh, and here we are, and still we're getting popped. Everyone's getting popped, and I say we, as an industry and as a overall. Yeah, cybersecurity industry, it's unbelievable.
Yeah,
If this was the air industry, aviation, for example, um, Christ, we would have been shut down years ago. And I think that's a really good dovetail into how we should be treating ultimately suppliers who are getting popped,
yeah,
as well as ultimately, who you buy your products from. Because if a plane crashed, and don't get me wrong, there is loss of life there and similar, but ultimately we are seeing instances where there have been sadly loss of life from cyber attacks,
mm,
from healthcare and similar. So we're thinking, well, if a plane crashed, you would never fly with them ever again. That'd be the end of that company, essentially. Don't get me wrong, rebranding, all this kind of jazz and stuff anyway. However, in the cyber world, it's amazing how you can get popped as many times as you like. And it was like, thanks everyone. I appreciate it. Actually, we just released a new product now. He's like,
yeah, 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 yeah.
you're the provider trying to protect me. How can you not protect yourself?
Yes.
It is a crazy world and it's an interesting world. But there was a great
I
funny enough.
think CrowdStrike like recorded like a record quarter, like 2 or 3 quarters after was it the
Yeah,
2024 incident? So like it's just mental, isn't it? Yeah.
it is crazy. I think but it shows you everyone is, for lack of a better word, desperate because we are facing a formidable threat. And of course, the problem there is, of course, is that the bad guys are just getting worse. They are getting tooled up to the nines. You hear about, in China, there's massive warehouses of people just using tools. And in North Korea as well, they're pretending to be us. They're pretending to be, lots of people like, tech workers and similar. So it's a mixed battlefield, and ultimately it truly is. And when people say, "Oh, we're not a war," I think ultimately we are in a sense, not to be too frightening, but it is information warfare where you're trying to steal ultimately the capital. You're just trying to steal the gold of somebody else, right? Just in a different way.
Mm.
If there were people walking up and going into the banks and stealing gold, there'd be ruptions. However, they're just doing that in a very different way.
Mm.
Uh,
Intelligence is currency, though, isn't it? It absolutely is.
100% completely agree. I think, and to be fair, that's where the threat intel as a industry is absolutely booming,
Mm.
just because people don't know. Uh, and again, not to delve into the world of VCs and making potentially even subpar products and similar again, but yeah, it really is, and people just jumping out at anybody who feels that they will help them.
Yeah,
Um, but I think it needs to be seen and needs to be framed in a way that ultimately we're going to find something that you're not already aware of, rather than do the basics. It's like ultimately we should be doing the basics, and it's amazing how the basics aren't being done
yeah,
at many different levels across the industry. From what I've seen from my time in pen testing, it's frightening in terms of how just basics need to be done. Whether it's a case of authentication, okay, everybody needs your identity, right? Or at the same time, just general patching. Not to say that okay, you're going to patch the world. And I've got to admit, I absolute top marks to the security teams who are the security vendors really who are making massive strides in terms of making sure that you don't have to patch the world, you don't have to patch every single critical, you just have to really patch the ones that matter
mm,
and the ones that apply to you. And I think that's where probably you have X and all the other similar social media platforms where you do have what I call the vulnerability hand grenade, where it's like, oh my goodness, this, oh my goodness, oh my goodness, everyone gets carried away with it. Yet only 1% of the world is using it, or 1% in a particular environment they're using that. And don't get me wrong, you can link that to CVSS and similar. Um, but everybody loves a gossip, and everybody loves that kind of um, that boy cried wolf, but we still don't learn a lesson. Rather than say, well, that person's always saying that. Don't worry, ignore them, because of the risk of potentially getting popped by that one.
yeah,
So it's a funny old world, and cyber, I just can't see how it's like any other industry.
yeah.
Having not worked in those industries, but having tested those industries in a pen test capacity, yeah, it's a mad place.
It is, and probably to just to bring us to a close more than anything, Darren, I've only got one last question for you, and it is putting you on the spot a little bit, but it's something new for the podcast, and it is basically your security five-a-side team. It's basically you can pop yourself in it to make it a little bit easier, so you only have to pick four people, but Basically, if you were starting a company tomorrow, who are some sort of exceptional people that you kind of want to give a shout out to that you've come along? They don't necessarily have to be purely security. They could have been sort of like former bosses, could be like directors, they could be even salespeople that you've come across where you're like you were really good, you went above and beyond. It could be anybody, but basically people you've come across in your career where you're like, yeah, they are a part of my dream five-a-side. What are you sort of thinking, Darren?
Phew, you're going to put a target on my back now, aren't you? Um, so, um, I mean, so all of these people have worked for a capacity, so I can't just choose, rock stars out in the LinkedIn world and similar.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, there's lots of wannabes out there and similar, right? But I think these people would be, yeah, if don't get me wrong, I wouldn't have the money to hire them, but still, some fantastic people. So, I'm not sure if I can choose anybody in my own company, because I think that'd be unfair. But uh, yeah, go for it. Okay, Ryan Dewhurst, absolute rock star. And to be fair, many people have used his tools before they've even known him. So, he's definitely in there for sure. Um, there's a bit of well, I might cheat. There's a bit of a cyber power couple in Joe and Andrew Miller. They're great people, and yeah, very different talents, but yeah, definitely in that. Um, oh, probably Chris Whitehead. So I went back many years with Chris, and so yeah, he's got great talents.
Yeah.
He's been around the block for sure. Um,
And then one more.
hmm,
So we've got Ryan, Joe,
okay,
Andrew, Chris. Yeah.
yeah, I can't choose any other one. That'd be unfair. Daryl Lane. So Daryl's a fantastic guy. Lots of different experience in many different weird and wonderful things. So yeah, they would be my five. Don't get me wrong. Lots of subs on that bench, though, I would say. So
Of course, of course. No, that's absolutely brilliant. And look, it's only a bit of fun is that last question. Obviously, it doesn't mean anything, but like I say, it's just always good to see sort of like how the industry sort of links up because it's a small place, and
it
it's good
is.
to see in that sort of network. Um, but yeah, that pretty much brings us to our time. So I've really enjoyed it, Darren. This was a fun one because we went massively off on tangents, but somehow brought it back to our core somehow. Hats off to us both. But if anybody has any questions for what myself and Darren raised today, be sure to get involved in the comments, and I'll be sure to put Darren's information down below. But once again, Darren, thank you very much for coming on the Screw Space podcast.
Great stuff. Thanks, Nick. Appreciate your time.